I was 30 years old when my father hugged me for the first time. It wasn't at a birthday party, or my graduation, or my wedding. It was outside an operating room, me in a hospital gown, shaking with fear, and him thinking it might be the last time he ever saw me alive. In that awkward, tight hug, I understood two things that changed everything. My father had always loved me. He just didn't know how to show it. And the reason for that was a lot older, a lot deeper than I ever imagined. When I was a kid, my dad was someone who took up space but not affection. He was there, physically present. On the couch watching the evening news, at the dinner table eating in silence, out in the yard fixing something that had broken. But he was never emotionally here, never truly present. I'd see other dads at the school pickup line hugging their sons after Little League games, lifting them up in the air, tousling their hair with obvious pride and joy. Mine, when he came to pick me up from school, would just pull up to the curb, lean over to open the passenger door, and say in a flat voice, "Get in." That was it. No, "How was your day?" No smile. No touch. If I brought home a report card with good grades, if I came running to him excited with straight A's, he'd glance at it with a neutral expression and say, "That's what you're supposed to do. That's why you go to school." If I brought home a bad grade, the scolding was harsh, long, filled with words that made me feel small and stupid. Compliments? No. Physical affection? Even less. The closest thing to affection I ever got from him was an occasional pat on the shoulder, quick and mechanical, followed by a half-joke to cover the awkwardness. "You're getting big, kid. Soon you'll be taller than me." That was it. That brief shoulder pat was the most love I knew from him. I must have been around 8 years old when something happened that stuck with me. I was watching a movie on TV, one of those family dramas they play on Sunday afternoons. In one scene, a father and son who'd been separated for years finally reunite and hug each other tight, both crying, holding on like they'd never let go. I remember turning my head to my mom, who was sitting next to me knitting something, and asking her quietly, almost in a whisper, "How come his dad hugs him like that and mine doesn't hug me?" She looked away from the TV, stopped knitting for a moment, ran her hand through my hair with a sad smile and said, "That's just how your dad is, honey. He didn't grow up with that stuff. His father never showed him how. But he loves you, I promise. In his own way." I wanted to ask, "What way is that? How am I supposed to know?" But I stayed quiet, because in practice, in real life, his own way of loving me just looked like not touching me, not looking me in the eyes, not saying the words I desperately needed to hear. As a teenager, I realized there was no point waiting for something that never came. I stopped expecting his affection, his approval, his presence at important moments. Simple things that other kids took for granted became impossible dreams for me. Big games at school where I played, award ceremonies where I received recognition, milestone moments that should have been celebrated. Other dads were there at every game, cheering loudly from the stands, yelling their kids' names, celebrating every small victory. Mine rarely came. He'd say he was too busy with work, that he didn't have time for that kind of thing. When he did show up, because my mom practically forced him, he'd stand way in the back with his arms crossed, face expressionless, like he was fulfilling an annoying obligation. I remember one specific time. I came home with a Most Valuable Player trophy from a regional basketball tournament. I was so proud, so excited. I ran into the house and handed it to him with a huge smile. "Look, Dad, I won. I was MVP. We won the whole thing." He took the trophy in his rough hands, looked at it quickly without any emotion, and said in a dismissive tone, "All right, that's nice. Now put that away and go do your homework. Trophies don't pay the bills or get you into college." It hurt. Every time something like that happened, it hurt deep. But I learned to hide that hurt behind anger, behind resentment, behind walls. I started to distance myself more and more. Spent more time at friends' houses than at mine. Locked myself in my room for hours. Buried myself in video games, music, anything that took me away from him. When he'd try to talk to me, I'd answer with one word. "Yeah. No. Whatever." And deep down, I thought with growing bitterness, if he doesn't care about me, why should I care about him? If my life doesn't interest him, I won't share it with him. When I became an adult, When I moved out for college and later got my own place, my relationship with my father turned into a kind of silent contract, a tacit agreement of superficial cordiality. We talked only about safe, neutral things that required no emotions. Sports scores, gas prices, politics, the weather, news headlines. Nothing deeper than that. He never asked how I was feeling, really. Never shared how he was feeling. On birthdays, he'd call punctually and say in a formal voice, "Happy birthday. Hope you have a good one." Sometimes when we saw each other, he'd extend his hand for a firm, brief handshake. That was it. I pretended I was okay with that. I told myself, trying to convince myself, better a cold father than no father at all. At least he's alive. At least he's there. At least he provides. But deep inside, in a hidden corner of my heart, there was still that 8-year-old boy waiting desperately for a hug that never came. At 30 years old, my life took an unexpected turn. I found out I had a serious heart issue. It started with symptoms I ignored for months. Extreme fatigue I blamed on work stress. Shortness of breath climbing stairs I attributed to being out of shape. Strange chest pains I convinced myself were just anxiety. Until one day, in the middle of a work meeting, the pain got so intense I couldn't pretend anymore. They rushed me to the ER. Tests, more tests, EKG, echocardiogram, stress tests, endless blood work. Finally, the cardiologist, a man in his 50s with glasses and a serious expression, looked me directly in the eyes and said, "You're going to need surgery. It's not an emergency this very second, but we can't put it off. This is serious." When I heard the word surgery, my world flipped upside down. I've always hated needles, hospitals, anything medical. And now they were telling me they were going to cut my chest open, operate on my heart. I called my mom from the hospital. I couldn't control the trembling in my voice. When I told her, she cried immediately, just like I knew she would. I heard her sobs on the other end mixed with broken words. "Oh my God, my baby, my boy." My dad got on the phone afterward. His voice was oddly calm, controlled, almost cold. "Okay. Stay calm. When's the surgery scheduled?" I gave him the date, 2 weeks away. "We'll be there," he said without emotion. "Don't worry." We hung up. I thought he had it all under control, that everything was fine. But in the nights leading up to the surgery, I barely slept. I'd lie awake in the darkness staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything I hadn't done, everything I'd done halfway, without really living. And over, like a movie playing on repeat, one scene kept appearing in my mind that had never actually happened in real life. My dad hugging me, telling me everything would be okay, telling me he loved me. On surgery day, we got to the hospital early. Dawn was just beginning to light up the city. My mom walked beside the gurney as they wheeled me through the cold white hallways, holding my hand tightly, crying silently, trying to be strong and failing. My dad walked a few steps behind on the other side of the hallway, occasionally leaning against the wall, arms crossed over his chest, face hard as stone. He didn't come close. He kept that same distance as always. A young nurse with a professional smile she probably used 100 times a day came over with that rehearsed optimistic tone. "All right, champ, you'll be out of here good as new in no time. Everything's gonna be fine, you'll see." I tried to smile back, but fear had taken over every cell in my body, and the smile came out shaky, fake. When the medical team started pushing the gurney toward the double doors of the operating room, those doors that looked like the entrance to another world, my mom leaned over me, kissed my forehead with infinite tenderness, stroked my cheek, and cried openly, unable to hold it back anymore. My dad stayed put, motionless, several feet away. I thought with resignation, of course. That's him. That's how it is. He won't change even now. I closed my eyes, trying to mentally prepare for what was coming. Then suddenly, I heard his voice, hoarse, broken. "Hold up a second." The medical team stopped. I opened my eyes, surprised. My dad took a couple of quick steps toward me, came to the side of the gurney, and looked at me in a way I had never, ever seen in 30 years of life. His eyes were glassy, red. His mouth was trembling. His jaw clenched, fighting for control. And without saying anything at first, without words, he leaned over me and hugged me. It was a clumsy, awkward hug, way too tight, like he was trying to pin me there so I wouldn't go, to stop time itself. His arms wrapped around me with desperate force. I felt his chest shaking against mine. Smelled the familiar smell of cigarette smoke embedded in his clothes. Felt his scratchy, unshaven face against my cheek. And then, with a broken voice, almost inaudible, he whispered in my ear, "You're gonna come back, you hear me? You're gonna get through this. You're strong. You're my son. I love you, son. I love you so much." That, "I love you," hit me harder than the medical diagnosis, harder than the fear of surgery, harder than everything. I'd gone 30 years, 3 entire decades of my life, without hearing those 2 words come out of his mouth. And there, outside an operating room, with the smell of disinfectant and fear in the air, they all came out at once, rushed, desperate. I wanted to say, "I love you too, Dad." Wanted to say so many things I'd kept inside for years, but my voice wouldn't work. A huge knot in my throat prevented it. Only the tears came. Hot, abundant, unstoppable. The medical team had to gently separate us because it was time. The OR was ready. The team was waiting. As they wheeled me away, I turned my head and saw my dad crying openly for the first time in my life. That man of iron, that unbreakable rock, was crying like a lost child. The surgery went well. Better than expected, they told me afterward. When I woke up in the ICU, dazed from anesthesia, tubes and wires everywhere, my mom was beside the bed with puffy eyes from crying so much, but with a huge smile of relief. I asked with a raspy voice, barely audible, "Dad?" She nodded, stroking my hair. "He's outside. He refused to leave even for a second since they took you in. He stayed all night sitting in that waiting room, not moving, waiting for news." A couple of days later, back in a regular room, out of intensive care, recovering slowly, my dad came in alone. He closed the door gently, sat in the chair beside the bed, and was quiet for a long time, looking at the floor, nervously clasping and unclasping his hands. I was confused. This man always had something to say, always filled silences with comments about anything. This time, no. This time the silence stretched out, thick, loaded with unspoken things. Finally, he looked up, met my eyes, and said with a trembling voice, "I need to explain something to you. Something I should have explained a long time ago." My voice was still weak from the surgery. "Explain what, Dad?" He looked down at the floor again, searching for the right words, and started to speak. "In our family, men don't hug. Never. It's a rule that goes back generations. My dad never hugged me, not once in his entire life. My grandfather never hugged my dad. The way we showed love in our family was by putting food on the table, working hard, making sure nothing was lacking materially. That was love to them." He took a long pause, breathed deep like it was hard to continue. "When you were born, I held you once. The doctor put you in my arms and said, 'Here, hold your son.' I froze, went rigid, afraid I'd drop you, afraid I'd hurt you. You were so small, so fragile. After that, I guess I just didn't know how to do it again. I didn't know how." He looked up at me with an intensity I'd never seen in him. "It wasn't because I didn't want to hug you. It wasn't because I didn't love you. It's because I didn't know how. Nobody taught me. Nobody showed me it was okay." He kept talking, like he'd opened a locked drawer that had been sealed for decades, like the words had been waiting years to come out. "When I was a kid, I must have been 5, maybe 6. I tried to hug my father once. He'd just come home from work, exhausted like always, and I was so happy to see him that I ran to him and wrapped my arms around his leg with all my strength, looking for his attention, looking for his love." His voice broke a little. "You know what he did?" He pushed me away roughly and said in a hard voice, "Cut that out. That hugging stuff is for girls. Men don't hang all over each other like that. You need to be strong." He rejected me, made me feel like what I was feeling was wrong. "That day," he continued with moist eyes, "I learned that hugging was wrong. That men don't hug, don't cry, don't say I love you. That men just work, endure, stay silent, and provide. They taught me that over and over, rejection after rejection." He wiped away a stubborn tear running down his wrinkled cheek and said with a broken voice, But when I saw you going into that operating room, in that ridiculous hospital gown, looking like that little kid I once held in my arms for just a few seconds, I got so scared, so overwhelmingly terrified of losing you without ever having hugged you, without ever having told you what you mean to me, that something broke inside me. I forgot everything they taught me. Silence. A silence full of shared tears. That was the reason. Finally, I understood. My father only hugged me at 30 years old because the fear of losing me was stronger than decades of conditioning, stronger than the learned shame of showing love, stronger than all the absurd rules they'd imposed on him. After the surgery, after that conversation that changed everything, our relationship started to transform. It didn't become perfect overnight, didn't turn into one of those movie relationships, but it changed. Deeply. My dad started coming over more often. He'd take me to follow-up appointments with the cardiologist, sit with me in the waiting room, ask the doctor technical questions I didn't even understand. He'd ask how I was feeling, really. Not just physically, but emotionally. At first, we both stumbled over the words, over the new emotions. It was still incredibly hard for him to say, "I love you," while looking me directly in the eyes. Sometimes it came out halfway, broken up, disguised. You know, right? That, "I care about you a lot." That, "You're important to me." And I understood perfectly. Because I was also learning to say "I love you" without feeling embarrassed, without feeling like it was inappropriate or weak. We were learning together a language we should have learned from the beginning. The hugs became more frequent. At first they were quick, awkward, half-sideways hugs with pats on the back to disguise the emotion. Over time, they became more natural, longer, more genuine. I realized that each hug was a small victory against an entire upbringing based on toughness, against generations of men who never learned to touch with tenderness. A few years later, when I'd fully recovered, my son was born. When I took him to meet his grandfather, I watched the scene from the doorway, holding back tears. My dad took the baby in his arms with exquisite care, with a delicacy I'd never seen in him. He looked at the wrinkled little face of that newborn, smiled, a full, genuine smile filled with light, and without thinking twice, without hesitation, hugged him tight against his chest. Right there, in that precise moment, I saw a cycle break before my eyes. I saw generations of pain dissolve. A man who was never hugged by his father, who barely hugged his own son, was hugging his grandson like it was the most natural thing in the world, like he'd always done it that way. That day, when he carefully handed the baby back to me, I hugged my son tightly, kissed him on the forehead, and thought with absolute determination, with him it'll be different from the start. He won't have to wait 30 years to get a hug from me. He won't have to be on the edge of death to hear me say "I love you." He's going to grow up knowing he's loved, every day, with words and with gestures. Today, several years after all this, I understand clearly that that hug at 30 years old didn't magically erase my childhood without physical affection, or all the times I desperately needed a gesture of love and found only cold distance. It didn't erase the nights I cried in my room feeling like I wasn't enough for my father, that there was something wrong with me. But that hug gave me two fundamental keys to healing. First, knowing that my dad wasn't a cold monster incapable of loving. He was a deeply wounded man, educated with emotional violence to hide everything he felt, to repress any show of tenderness. Second, the absolute certainty that I don't have to repeat the same story, that the cycle can be broken, that I can choose to be different. Sometimes I still miss many hugs I didn't get when I needed them. I miss not hearing "I'm proud of you" when I won that trophy, or "I love you" when I graduated, or "I'm here for you" when I was going through difficult times in my teens. But instead of staying only in that lack, in that emptiness, I decided to do the opposite with those who come after me. Today I hug my son until he gets annoyed and tells me laughing, "Okay, Dad, okay." I hug my friends, not just at funerals or New Year's parties, but also in casual encounters, when I see them sad, when they need to know they're not alone. I hug my mother frequently, silently thanking her for all the love she gave when my father couldn't. I hug my father every time we see each other, without shame, without rushing. I hug my wife, not just in romantic moments, but also in difficult moments, in moments of exhaustion, in ordinary moments. And every time I do, I feel like I'm telling that 8-year-old boy I once was, That boy who wondered why his dad didn't hug him. I know you missed this. I know it hurt. But now we're doing it differently. Now we're healing. My father only hugged me at 30 years old. And it was because he got more afraid of losing me than of looking weak. That fear broke decades of armor. I'm not going to wait until I'm afraid to show love to the people I love. I'm not going to wait for a tragedy to say what I feel. I'm going to do it now. Today. Every day. If you also grew up with a father who never hugged you, with a distant father, cold, incapable of expressing affection, I want you to know something. You might not be able to change the past. You can't erase those years of emptiness, but you can choose how you're going to hug your future and the people walking through it with you. You can be the one who breaks the cycle. You can be different. If this story stirred something in you about your own father or about the way you show love to your kids, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep following these stories. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. In the next video, you'll meet a man everyone sees as the strong one, the rock, the pillar of the family, that guy who never breaks, who always has the solution, who never allows himself weakness, but who sneaks down alone to the parking garage several times a week in the early morning hours, just to have one hidden place where he can cry without anyone seeing him. And you'll see what happens the day someone finds him there, sitting on the floor, crying. Don't miss it.